The Greeks had two huge literary genres. The genre of tragedy, where horrible things happen, everyone dies, and you're sad at the end, with a cathartic release of sadness. In the genre of comedy, that somehow things turn out okay. I think we can agree at this point that Brokeback Mountain is indeed tragic. It's both a story about all kinds of morality and immorality, and it's really sad at the end. Ennis alone pissing into his sink with his one true love dead, gone. So turning to our last short story of the first half of our time together, Sherman Alexie's Do You Know Where I Am? We have another romantic family drama with an ending, and I want you to keep, is it tragic what happens, or is it comic? Is it a sad ending or a happy ending? And one of the reasons I think Sherman Alexie is so interesting is because, as with much in life, it's so not black and white. It's so mixed and confusing and right and wrong at the same time, which is a perfect challenge for us to think about in terms of the complexity of real lives and real stories and the human heart and human heart's commitments and values. Hopefully you're going to read, you will read this story very quickly. It's a fun, great read. You will enjoy it. It's a much more accessible, it's contemporary, it's in the language of our moment. It's such a relief to read something more like us than something so broken up like Brokeback, so sad as Gardenia, so medieval as Dante, and so biblical as Song of Songs. Phew. With this text, you get finally simply a good read. The author is Sherman Alexie. Confusing because it's two first names, but like all our authors, we refer to him through his last name. Alexie says, Alexie's text, Alexie's story, Monet's story, Annie Proulx's story. So I talk to our friends with first names, talk to your authors with last names. So Alexie's story is called Do You Know Where I Am? You will certainly find out where that title comes from. It's a lovely challenge about a poster that they put up, but it's also kind of an existential question that happens with couples. Do you really know what's going on with me? We ask our husbands, we ask our wives, our lovers, our girlfriends and boyfriends. Do you really know where I am these days? It's a short story that comes from an anthology of short stories. An anthology is the technical word for a collection. So many fiction writers will publish anthologies of their short stories. The short stories are called 10 Little Indians. It's written by Sherman Alexie, who of course is a Native American. He himself grew up on a reservation, and he is a member that is registered with the Spokane Coeur d'Alene tribe, a tribe that I can't remember if they're Sioux or Cherokee derived tribe, but now located mostly in the Northwest, in the regions of Washington State, in southern parts of Vancouver and the west of Canada. You know, this title of the anthology, 10 Little Indians, it's an interesting title for a book. You may know the song, 1 little, 2 little, 3 little Indian, 4 little, 5 little, 6 little Indian. That's a sing-song story that we tell. But where we got this sing-song story from the 19th century is it was a counting song that was originally about scalping Indians. A counting song counting the scalps of Indians that had been murdered by by white colonial powers. So it's an odd, when you know some Native American history, when you're writing from the perspective of a Native American, the history of America is a very, very different history. And Sherman Alexie is an important 20th and 21st century voice because he has become one of the more prominent speakers, one of the more prominent literary figures representing American experience through the focus and filters of a Native American whose history long predated Columbus, whose people have been decimated by first by disease, secondly by violence, and lastly by the horrors of the 19th century American administrations that just destroyed their lands and sold off. You can read more about the story in Howard Zinn and other stories of the Native American experience. So he's very, very consciously representing that Native American experience. And he's doing so with a challenging morality tale. If we were to say quickly, what's this about? Well, it's the story of a family. It's the story of a couple and the whole span of that couple's life. How they got together, how they survived some of the challenges that all couples face, and how they ended as a family. So there's a really quick little what's there. We also have an interesting representation in this story of both a very familiar courtship, a familiar college experience, a familiar long family, and yet some little hints of how being Native American makes you understand yourself and your family and who you are differently. So as you guys are reading, I want you to be looking for hints of Native Americanness. How is this couple like us in so many ways, but in some really pretty important ways? How are they not like the quote, typical middle-class American experience that so many of us, although as if there were one, right? White experience, black experience, city, suburb, we all come from very different worlds. Well, there's some very specific things about the Native American history that Sherman Alexie hints at, suggests, or points out as he's telling the story of his family. So come back with a couple more little videos to help you get through and to talk more about how all of this reading is going to fall into a midterm experience here in the late afternoon sun of my recording studio. I'll see you in a little bit.